Hi guys, Chad Ronson with EPI. Today we're going to show you how to take apart the clutches on a 2020 RZR Pro XP. This will also work in the 4-seater. We'll show you how to take the clutches apart, install a clutch kit, and put them all back together. Alright, we did some of this beforehand just to speed up the video a little bit. Basically what you want to do is jack up the rear end of the machine so the rear tire is just barely off the ground. Then remove the lower shock bolt. And then you don't have to take the whole shock out, just the bottom bolt, so you can move the shock around a little bit. Then you want to remove the clamp off this, pull this off. It usually comes off pretty darn hard, and sometimes it'll come off up here. That's fine, you'll just have to plug it back in when it does. And then remove the clutch cover bolts. Again, we did this ahead of time just to speed it up. Once you get all the bolts loose, the nice thing is with these new covers, the bolts won't fall out, they'll stay in the cover. Once these are loose, work this out. And you wiggle around. This is where it's nice to have that shock loose and out of the way. Makes it a lot easier. Just pull the cover out of the way. This will be your primary clutch or your drive clutch. This is going to be the secondary clutch or the driven clutch. And then your belt, obviously. The biggest thing with the belt is, especially if you're going to reuse the same belt, is mark or pay attention to how the belt is on there. You always want to run the belt the same way it's been running on the machine if you're going to reuse it. Most of the time it should read from left to right, so you can actually read the numbers on it, and there should be an arrow, which in this case would be pointing forwards towards the front of the machine. You want to do that. If you're putting on a new belt, same thing, just put it on that same direction, and whenever you take them off, always make sure you put them on the same way. This machine will come with a belt removal tool, which you thread in. I don't know if you can see it here, there's a little hole threaded right here, and it'll be this. This is normally in your toolkit. If you don't have one, EPI sells them. The part number is SCP2, and as this threads in, it's going to open up that secondary clutch and take the tension off the belt. So to get the primary clutch off, what you want to use is a small bar, a big screwdriver works. The biggest thing is when you put it through the clutch, you want to go through and make sure it rests on the outside edge of the towers. So you're not going on this part here where this button slide up and down, because if you damage that, you'll wreck your buttons when it starts moving. So just put it in there so it stays in place, or you can have somebody hold it. Make sure if you do hold it on something that you're not going to wreck any brake lines or wires or anything up there. And then just loosen it up. So this one's a little bit different than, again, most of the Polaris's. It's going to have a T60 bolt in here to pull out. Once you pull that out, then there's a little collar in here, and when you pull this out, this is the outer shaft of the clutch. There's two washers that'll drop out of there. This one's got quite a bit of dirt in there. A lot of times you want to blow it out ahead of time. But when you pull this collar out, two washers will fall out, and try to pay attention how they go in there. And then, I don't think you'll be able to see them until they come out of there, but get that stuck a little bit. So these are the two washers that come out. They might, if you don't pay attention, they might roll out or whatever, and then you'll need them to put them back together. When you put the clutch back together, they'll go like this. The other thing we've done in this machine, we've had this one apart quite a few different times, is there's an O-ring on these now from Polaris, which really, it helps to hold this plate in place, but it makes it really hard to get it out. If you can't pull the shaft out, you don't want to grab onto it with a pliers or anything like that, because if you mar up this surface here, your bushing rides over that and you can wreck your cover bushing here. So the best thing to do then is have somebody push in on it, take your cover bolts out equally and hold it square, and then pull your spring out. Once this cover is off, you can pull your spring out, then you can grab onto this and pull it out. We ran ours without the O-ring and haven't seen any issues. I think they do it just to help hold everything together when they end there. So that's up to you if you want to reuse it or not. But then what you want to do is with your spring out, you don't need to put your spring back in, but put your cover plate back on, so it helps support these towers when you go to take the clutch off. Before you pull the clutches apart or off the machine, take a little marker or a magic marker and just mark an X on them straight across from each other on the two clutch shafts. Another thing different on this style clutch is, in a perfect world, right now you should be able to pull that whole clutch half off. It's on a spline shaft. It's not held together like the old style clutches are. So sometimes you get them off. What we found is by the time they get dirty, corroded and all that, a lot of times they don't want to come apart. It's easier and better just to pull a hold of the clutch off. But that way when you put them back together, you can align them correctly for balancing and stuff like that. So then what you want to do is you got your shaft out of there. You thread your puller in. This is a PCP 24, a new puller for a lot of the machines. And you thread this in. And we're going to basically just tighten this up so it'll keep tightening, and pull it so the clutch off. We'll have to put our shaft in here, or our bar in here, so it catches a little different. You know, sometimes it just slides right off, sometimes it'll make a big popping noise, but it does take a little bit of effort. So this one's pretty tight. If you can't get it off, we'll try it one more time, and it doesn't want to come. You just want to take a hammer and hit it nice and square, because if you hit down like this, you've got a good chance of breaking the puller and stuff. But give it a couple taps, like that, nothing crazy. Most of the time that's good enough to break it or have it come off. If you can't, then you got to get on there again and try tightening it. So now it's coming off. This one didn't make a big pop, but it's come loose. I had to go grab a little bit bigger breaker bar to get it to come loose. But there it goes. Like I said, sometimes it'll make a big pop noise, sometimes it just slides off hard like that. Once you get that part loose, you can back the clutch puller out. And one thing to remember on this style of clutch is when you're carrying the clutch around or moving around, make sure you got both halves in your hand. Otherwise you might be walking across and they might slide apart and you'll break your clutch. So to get the secondary clutch off, we still got the tool in here to keep the belt loose, so that comes off pretty easy. Here's the arrows we were talking about on there now. This is how it came off the machine. And then you can unthread this. And then this one will take a 15 millimeter. And when it comes off, you'll see different washers in here, so just keep track of those, make sure you don't lose them. Take them all off with the machine or with the clutch. Catch them all there. And then the clutch should just slide off the machine. So I blew out the clutch so it's a lot cleaner to work with. This is the CCT 510 clutch compression tool. We got this locked in the vise. Otherwise you can bolt it onto the bench if you want, or even hold it against the bench. But you want to slide the clutch on there before you take it apart. We've already got this one marked, but take a marker and mark an X on them so you get all the things lined up. This does normally have an X on this clutch, on the cover plate and on the spider and on the movable sheave, but it's just easier and quicker just to mark them yourself too. Just to double check it. Slide actually on this one. It's easier if you just use the big washer that comes in the kit. You don't want to use an impact on it, you just want to do it by hand. Basically what we're going to do is we're just going to put a little bit of tension on here so we can remove these outside cover bolts. And you want to use a tool like this, that way it's compressing evenly so you're not damaging that bushing at all. And just so these are all loose. Once these are loose, you just back this off. It's nice and easy for one person to do it. And this one's got a really tall spring in it. So that's why we use just the washer on here. It gives you a little more working room on it. Once you get this off, you can set it aside. And then all the tension's off the weight, so we can change those now. It's usually an 1/8 inch Allen wrench and 3/8 or 10 millimeter socket on the other side works the best. And you just loosen that up, pull the bolt out, pull the weight out, and then to put them back, you just do the same process for all three. Put them back in. Actually, we're going to switch to a different weight on this one. And just do the opposite to tighten these up. If your bolts are rusty or really sticky, like they don't want to come out there, take a piece of green emery cloth or Scotch-Brite and just kind of scuff it up a little bit, clean it. When you're done, you want to make sure your weight pivots nice and freely in there. Also inspect your rollers up in here. Make sure they're turning free, there are no flat spots, and everything's working good there. Repeat that whole process for all three weights. Alright, so one quick note to watch. This is important when you're putting the clutch back onto the machine. I don't know how good you can see it in the video here, but you can see the splines on the aluminum spider where it comes on the metal shaft. They should be, the aluminum is maybe up a 1/16 of an inch or so. When we put the clutch back together and back onto the machine, we want to make sure that's pressed all the way on there. We've ran into some issues where people take them apart, put them back together, and if they're not cleaned very good or they're dirty, they might not close all the way, and then you go out and ride them and your clutch bolt will come off. So just make sure that that's seated all the way down, and then you should be good. We put all the weights in there, they're nice and free. Put the spring in there, make sure it's moving in there. One other thing to do before you put it all back together is this is a bushing in here. So you don't want to use any brake cleaner, acetone, or anything like that. Just use a dry blue towel or paper towel and just wipe it down, and that'll get it good and clean, just to clean it out good. And then you're going to want to stick it on. Make sure you line up your X's, which should be right here. And then we'll use the tool to compress it down. Alright, so we got this compressed down. We're going to tighten your bolts. You go really lightly on these. I'm just using an impact to speed up for the video. But these are torqued at 100 inch-pounds. Again, 100 inch-pounds, not foot-pounds. So it's pretty light. Once you get those torqued down, you just pull this back or loosen this up. And then you can lift off again. Make sure you're holding both halves of the clutch when you lift it anytime you're carrying it around. The other thing you want to do is take a clean paper towel and make sure and you can use brake cleaner on this part, but clean out your clutch taper really good on this one. It's really important on these RZR Pros to do that. But just either a dry paper towel or a little bit with some brake cleaner, and also clean the stub of your crankshaft before you put the clutch back on. So now we're going to change the spring in the secondary clutch. Right now these two clutch shafts can come apart, so careful when you move them around also. But before you take them apart, you want to mark them. We got an X on this side. If you flip it right over, we got an X there. It'll move a little bit because it can shift in the helix a little bit. But as long as you got those lined up, when it's all assembled, you know you're good. So once you do that, you just kind of turn it. Clutch shaft will come apart. And then you'll have these three bolts. It's easier to break these bolts loose before you put them in the tool. They're a T50. So this will be your helix. It's steel on this machine, and then your secondary spring will be right here. And basically what you do is slide it down, or slide it on with the helix side down, and use the big washer and nut, and then thread this down, and you basically just want to get this so it's not craned down, just a little tension on there. And then when we loosen these bolts up, it'll let the spring come out. So once you got a little tension on it, take that and loosen these out. basically you want to just let this come up nice and slow as it goes. The other thing I didn't mention is you can also mark the helix and the clutch so they line up properly in the same spot. That way it's going to put the same together, because at least in the EPI kit you'll reuse the same helix, we just change the spring out. Alright, so once you got that backed off, here's the spring and the helix. And there's your helix, secondary spring, and you have a little collar in here. And then there's also bushing in here. So what you want to do is you want to blow all this out really good. Take a clean rag again and wipe these off dry with the bushings. And then on the clutch face here and on the other half, on this part, you want to take a Scotch-Brite or a real light Scotch pad or real light sandpaper, so you don't leave any deep grooves, but you just want to kind of buff off the surface there. Basically, to clean it, we took a clean paper towel in here and blew it out first and then wiped it down. And on the clutch face, you just want to take a Scotch pad like this and just go around. Again, we're not putting deep scrapes in it or nothing like that. We're just kind of scuffing it up, getting all that belt glazing off. You can go around a couple times. And then when you're done, get it down here real quick. If you go all the way around, then you'll want to take a clean rags, spray some brake cleaner on it, and just wipe it down like this. Do the same thing to the other half. On the other half, what we want to watch and do on this is, if you can see these rollers in here, make sure they're turned freely, make sure they're not cracked or flat spot or anything like that, and then clean the clutch and then just dry wipe this center shaft again on that. So, alright, so now to put this together, again you want to dry wipe this bushing and this helix here, where my finger's in the center. Dry wipe that, set it down in there. We put an X on the helix so we line it up properly. Put the spring in, make sure you got this center piece in here. Easiest way to do is that, just hold the spring like that, tip it upside down, slide it down into the helix. Make sure the spring is seated in the helix, and then you want to slowly compress that nice and square. Just kind of line up your bolts as you're going down with it, and then once you get close, before you crank it down tight, I always like to start the bolts to get them going. Sometimes you might have to move around a little bit to get the bolts to start. Again, you don't want to super torque on these. Then you want to use the compression tool to bring it down square on it. I always just tighten these up by hand. That part's done. Just back off the nut and pull it out of the tool. Once you got it out of the tool, remember there's an X here. And just hold this side up like that and line up your X. But you gotta somehow remember where they go. X is here. I'm trying to hard to do this in front of the camera here, but slide them together. Make sure your X's line up, which they do, and just make sure you hold it together as you carry it over back to the machine. All right, so to install the clutch on the machine, basically just slide it on. You might have to put the machine in gear so the shaft doesn't spin on you. There we go. Make sure it slides all the way on, and then make sure you got all your washers that came off of there. Put those in place. Make sure they get seated square in there. And you'll want to torque this to 43 foot-pounds. We'll do it real quick like that for the video, but 43 foot-pounds on that. And then the easiest way we found is thread your belt tool back into it. You don't have to go too far into there, just enough to open it up a little bit. Stick your belt back on. Again, we're going to put it on the same direction it came off, which is so you can read the letters from left to right and the arrows pointing forward. And then give it a little bit more so I have enough room to put the primary on. And then we'll do the primary. And the primary, what you got to make sure you do is we got to end up with this washer on first, and then this washer and that. The best way I found to do that is actually put the washers in through the spring. Make sure they're seated. Again, if you've had the clutch halves apart, make sure that that aluminum spline down there is just like a 1/16 of an inch taller than the steel, and that tells you it's on all the way. And then you want to kind of wiggle around and make sure that steel shaft gets seated all the way down in there. Once you do that, you just grab them, clutch on. And again, if you had the clutch half apart, make sure your X's line up for your alignment. Then you'll have to stick a bar through here again. And then we'll torque that onto 110 foot or 100 foot-pounds. I know if you read the manual, it'll say a little bit more, but we found some issues. If you over torque this primary clutch, you'll have some issues with it. Basically, it's just slide. Once you know you got your shaft in there and those washers in there correct, thread this in and torque it to 100 foot-pounds. And once that's torqued, remove your bar. Remove your belt tool. And you usually want to put it in neutral and spin the clutches so it resets the belt. We got that reset. Put your clutch cover on. Once you get that put back on, make sure you put your tube back on, bolt it on your shock, put the jack down, and you're ready to go.